All right, let's go through the Heroku setup. So we're going to go to Heroku.com first, and we're going to sign up. Pretty standard procedure. Put your email, you'll confirm it, and then you'll get an account, and then you will log in. So once we log in, we're going to see our dashboard, and I have several projects, but you probably will see nothing here since you are just starting out. That's fine. Then we are going to need to download some tools. So we're going to be working with Heroku through the command line. So go to here and install for Mac or Windows, do the installer for your appropriate operating system. Once you do that, what is going to happen is you're going to have a global command on your terminal, and if you type the word Heroku in it, it should actually do something and not throw an error. So if you type in something like that, it says command not found, but if Heroku is successfully installed, it'll just say something. Okay, so then we're going to log in. So we have to connect the terminal to our actual account that is on the web page. So all you do is type Heroku login and then your email and then your password. Okay, and then you are all set. You're now connected to Heroku. We need to actually build a project now. So let's see. We are going to use the authentication practice or authentication project. Yeah, authentication project. So this project is a combination of client and server. We have to realize some things. We have a server and client code in one GitHub repo just to keep it simple. Right? Normally these would be separated, but I don't want you to have to deal with two repos, so we just have them under one thing. You have to remember things in the server folder do not ever talk to the client folder and vice versa. You pretend that these two things are on totally separate computers. When we deploy to Heroku, the server is the only thing that needs to go to Heroku. But the client, the code of the client does need to be included in the server project in the public folder, because the client app is just the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And that just goes into the public folder, as we've seen. So we're going to have to do the build of our client project, which is just a create React app setup. We just do the build like we've seen, which is really just Webpack. Then we're going to have to manually copy some files over, which we'll see in a second. Each one of the folders, you have to do your own npm install, because they're technically supposed to be totally separate, and so they each have their own package JSON. So let's see. We're going to fork and clone this project so that the project is physically on our computer, which we have it here. I'm going to go into the server folder and do an npm install there, and then I'm going to separately go into the client folder and do a npm install there, which the server one is quick, client one will take a little while. All right, the client has installed, and if we do npm start, there's no difference. It's just a create React app template. It's the same thing we've always been doing. So if you do npm start, it's just going to load up the development server and show the web page. But the thing is, we're going to say, well, I am, so we have our authentication interface. I'm going to say, I'm done testing this. I'm done developing it. It's ready to go. I tested it, it's ready to be put into production or put onto Heroku so the world can see it and the world can use it. So whenever you come to that decision, you're not going to do npm start, you're going to do npm build. So npm run build. So if we look in the package.json, there's a command for npm build, which is part of create React app. And we're going to just use the script command they already included, which just concatenates all the files together and puts them into one file instead of having many dozens, hundreds of files as we've seen before. So once we do that, and if we open the client folder, the structure is very similar. We have this build folder that we probably never paid attention to, but now we can see in there that inside here we have HTML file that's all squished together. You can see that it has actual script tags in it that link to this other folder, static, which has JavaScript files and CSS files. So this is where the Webpack tool has combined all of our files into one huge file and taken out all the white space, a new line, because computers don't care about that stuff. That's for human beings. But now that human beings are done dealing with this code and it's just ready to go in production, now we can just take all the white space out and squish everything together. So in this static folder is where you can, or in the build folder, that's where you could just throw this onto a web hosting solution and just have it statically served. But the thing is, we need to also add our server. So we've got a backend API where the code is actually running on a server, an instance of a node that's executing our code. So we can't just throw the client code anywhere. We have to incorporate it with the server code. So the simplest way, the most primitive way to do this is you just say, okay, I'm going to go in that build folder. I'm going to copy everything from the build folder. Then I'm going to go to the server folder and I'm going to paste it into the public folder. And if stuff's already there, you just replace it. You just override it so that the static files can now be served by your custom server, the server that you built. So if we look at the server and we look at index, we can see what was the thing that says, that defines where our static files are going to be served from. That's right here. We said, anytime you just request the HTML page or someone requests it, look in the public folder and that's where it will be. So we could run our server and just like always, nothing out of the ordinary, node index.js, and it was just going to start a server as normal, and it's running on port 3001. So if we go to localhost 3001, we can see the same client information is showing up because our actual network request said go to localhost, don't request anything in the path, which means it defaults to index.html, and that is a static file. So then Express says, oh, you're requesting a static file. Where should I look for that? In the public folder. Okay, let's look over the public folder. I see the index.html is right there, so that's what I'm going to return to the client, and then the client sees it, gets it, and shows it. And now we have a fully functional web app, front and back end, in one project in the server folder. So now it's time to get this folder, the server folder, up to Heroku so that it's not just on your computer, it's on a public web server that everyone can see. So what's our next step? Okay, we did all that. Let's say we have to look at this proc file. So when we started our app, we did node space index.js. We said, hey, node, start this code at index.js. Well, Heroku has no clue that you want it to do that. It doesn't know what it's supposed to start. So this proc file is a Heroku specific thing, and in it you just give it a key and then a colon and then a command, which is just node space index.js. It's exactly what we typed. But now we're saying, hey Heroku, when you are looking for where to start, do this in order to start my server. So that is necessary for Heroku to work. Got to keep that in mind. Then what else do we need to do? We need to, let's see, our env file. So we talked about an environment file. We are now putting our code on a different environment. So that's a term used to describe different computers where your code can run. We ran it on our own personal computers, which is fine. Sometimes that's called the development environment. And now we're putting it on the Heroku computers, which is sometimes called the production environment. So we've got two different environments. There could be many environments: QA, staging, testing, release, all types of environments. We just have two for simplicity's sake. So it's a common situation that your app needs different information depending on where it's running, what environment it's running. So we have our computer versus Heroku, and we'll think about what's the simplest thing that we might need to be different on those two environments. Well, maybe the database is. There could be a lot of different things, but the most obvious thing we are actually using is the database. So if you are testing on your computer in front of you on your desk, you might want your app to be connected to a test database so that you can delete stuff, change stuff, and you're not messing up real data. But then when you put your app on production on Heroku, you want it to be connected to a production database where all the real data is, the important information is. So we need to change the MongoDB URL depending on where the app is. So one solution is that you could just hard code the URL and then change it to something else before you deploy it to Heroku, but that's really not a good idea. You don't want to change code right before you're about to push it to production. That's dangerous. You could break something. Also, we don't want to hard code sensitive information into our code. So right now, when we're loading Mongo, we are using this information from a global object called process. There's a key called env, which is an object. And then it itself has a key called MongoDB URI. So where is this coming from? Well, we're going to have a file, and it's going to be called .env. Inside of it, we're going to put a bunch of information that's environment specific. So there's no right or wrong answer to this. You just have to know what type of information could be different depending on what computer your program is running. So here I have a database called ACA test. Maybe when I put it on Heroku, it's supposed to be ACA normal, just regular. So we need to be able to change that somehow. Well, if we have it on this file only exists on my computer, and because it's a special thing, Node is able to read it, and it will pull that information, and it will just be populated into this object and this key. And then when we push it to Heroku, this file's not included because we've git ignored it. So right here, I've ignored the env file. It's not going to be pushed to Heroku. So we're going to have to do something different. And we might say, well, we'll put an env file in Heroku, which is a reasonable thought, but we'll probably have to take a different approach, which we'll see in a moment. So just be aware of the env file. The format is key equals something, and you can put it in quotes. If it's a number, you don't have to put it in quotes. And this name secret port, this can be anything. There's no rules. It's whatever you want to call or label a piece of information. So index.js, we are using a different MongoDB URL. We might want to use a different port number if we go to Heroku. And then we're using the secret key for the authentication. Okay, so what else? There is the env file. Okay, so there's one slight awkwardness. We're going to be using Git to push our code to Heroku. But Git doesn't exist in the server folder yet because we're using the Git repository in the top level folder, which is the authentication project. But we need to have it also in the server. So it's kind of awkward, but we're going to do a git init in the server folder. In real life, there'll be some other way that this is set up a little bit better than that. And I said, in reality, the server and client would be separate, so they would have their own Git repositories, but we're trying to keep things simple. So there's just one slight awkwardness. We need to do a git init in the server folder, and that's only one time every time you clone. So you initialize it, and then as long as it's this repo on your computer, you don't ever have to do this step again. Now we're going to create a site. So I'm going to do Heroku create, and I'm going to pick a site, auth practice 5. This can be whatever you want, but it has to be unique in the Heroku system. So hopefully no one's taken auth practice 5. Now I can do Heroku open, and it's going to open the website that it just created. We didn't put anything on it, so it's just a template blank. But you can see I now have a public URL where anyone can go to see my web page or my web project. So now let's actually put our code up there so that people can see it. In order to do that, we're going to use a technique we've been using this whole time to transfer files from one computer to another, which is Git. We've been doing Git push origin master or something like that our entire class career to get files to GitHub. Well, GitHub isn't the only thing that can understand Git. Heroku can. So we can also do a Git push Heroku master. If you look at the remotes, you can see that when we did a Heroku create, it added a remote to your Git repository on Heroku. See the URL Heroku, it's git.heroku.com, and then the name of your project. So it set you up a repository on the Heroku computers, not GitHub. GitHub doesn't have like a monopoly on having Git repos. Anyone can do this. So they're just using Git because everyone knows how to use Git and it keeps it simple. So, but before we do that, we still have to do the same process. We have to do the git add, git commit, and then the git push Heroku master. We didn't create a specific branch, so it's just master. And then what's going to happen is it's going to push your code from your local computer to the Git repo on Heroku. And there is a connection. So whatever is in your Git repo on Heroku is what is going to show up in this web page. Heroku does all the work of syncing that up. We don't have to really worry about it, but we just take it for granted. We just push to our repo on Heroku, and now whatever's there should show up on our web page. Well, now we see an error. So the problem is that we have, let's see. So if you go to your dashboard, you should now see that new project appear, whatever you called it, auth practice 5. And we said, well, we have this env file, and we have to create an env file for every environment. So maybe on Heroku, it's going to be ACA something else, prod, or production. Well, how do we do that on Heroku? You don't actually put an env file on Heroku. You do a different technique. So we're going to take all the information that we need. We're going to go to settings, reveal config variables, and we're going to put everything we had in the env file, we're going to put in here. So we had MongoDB URI, and we had the URL. I don't have a database set up for anything else, so I'm going to keep it test. And so all we've done is whatever's in our env file now goes into settings, config variables, and then we add it. Okay, that should be good. Now I just know off the top of my head that's what this application error was being caused by. In real life, if it could be anything. But we'll see now that we put their settings. We made a request to the server. Heroku said, what should I do? Oh, I should start the server through index.js. Let me start it up. Okay, I got a request to the root, which is actually index.html. Let me serve that from the public folder, and here is our interface. Now, we have our app exactly as it existed on our own computer. It's now on Heroku. There's no reason why anything should work differently. It's exactly the same. So the only thing is, we have to remember that anytime we change anything, whether it's in server, if I change the anything in here, it doesn't matter if I add another route or whatever you do, you have to remember you have to go through this process again. And if you go to the client and you change anything in the client, well, you have to go through the build process again. You then have to do the npm build, npm run build. You have to copy and paste the files from the build folder over to the server folder in the public folder. You have to do the git add, git commit, git push, and you have to go through that whole process in order to get your app refreshed with the new code. Now that seems like a lot of work, but there's two things to consider. One, you shouldn't be doing this very often. All of your coding should happen locally, and not until you say, okay, my app is completely done and it's ready to go, should you ever do this whole build process. Um, so it shouldn't happen, it depends. I mean, if you're playing around, you'll be doing it often just to be testing stuff. But in real life, this would happen once a week, maybe once every other week or something like that. So it's not supposed to really happen that often. And the second thing is, in reality, you would not be doing this by hand. You would be building scripts that will do all these processes just by one command. You would type one command, and then it would do the build, it would do the copy and paste, it would do the git check-in, git blah, 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 git push, and it would do all that for you. So that's reality. We're learning, so we need to do it by hand to see exactly what's actually happening. And then once we become experts in that, we can go further and maybe build some scripts to do this for us. Okay, that's it. Hope that helped.